Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and welcome back to every episode of SpongeBob Reviewed, Season 3 edition. Last time I mentioned that Seasons 2 and 3 blur together a bit in my mind, but after watching Season 2 again, I'm pretty sure I have a clear picture of what's coming for me in Season 3. Before we begin, let me just point out that there's been one more change in format here. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the date that the episode originally aired on Nickelodeon, as well as the number it aired in the season. So for instance, The Algae's Always Greener was the first episode in production order. However, it was the 7th episode out of the Season 3 episodes aired. I point all this out because Nickelodeon has a very strange airing order. It starts to really show later in this season when things get really weird, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's just start with the first episode, episode 41A, The Algae's Always Greener. Plankton uses a machine to see what it would be like to switch lives with Mr. Krabs. Fun fact, Plankton eats holographic meatloaf, even though he lives in a fast food restaurant. The chum bucket must be really nasty if Plankton won't even eat it. Anyway, my favorite part is Mr. Krabs in the nude. But, is this episode made of sponge or scum? It's a good episode. I love Plankton as a character, and it is wonderful seeing him in the role of Mr. Krabs, having to deal with overactive, over-hyper SpongeBob, and absolutely lazy Squidward. It's a miracle Mr. Krabs manages to get anything done in his business between these two crazy guys, and seeing Plankton play the straight man, in addition to Mr. Krabs' naked wackiness in this episode, it makes it absolutely wonderful and a fun way to start out the season. Get your water wings, because we're on episode 41B, SpongeGaurd on Duty. SpongeBob pretends to be a lifeguard even though he can't swim. Fun fact, SpongeBob can't swim. Yeah, America's favorite underwater creature cannot swim. Oh, you gotta love that irony. Anyway, my favorite part is SpongeBob and Patrick drowning. It takes a lot of good comedic timing to make something as horrifying as drowning funny, but SpongeBob and Patrick managed to do it. But is this episode spongy, or has it been sinking in the lagoon long enough to go some scum? It is in fact a good episode. I love the way it parodies the lifeguarding as seen on TV. Yeah, if you look at TV lifeguarding, it's mostly about walking around shirtless, having people adore you, lifting weights, being awesome. However, the gravity of the situation is you actually do have to, save lives every so often, and SpongeBob finds that out the hard way. Also, this is Larry's biggest performance to date. Larry's in that strange third tier of SpongeBob characters where they're there for most crowd scenes, but they're also usually only used for one or two gags, or maybe occasionally a little bit of an antagonist. He's not very often utilized, and as such, I think it makes him a pretty good character because you're not oversaturated with Larry. All that plus a bunch of clever jokes about the whole water-underwater thing, and it adds up to one really awesome episode. Magic Conch, which episode of SpongeBob is next?
Nothing.
No, it's actually 42A, Club SpongeBob. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward get stranded in the wilderness. Fun fact, the Magic Conch is similar to the real-world Magic 8-Ball. My favorite part? The Magic Conch itself. Come on, that thing is absolutely hilarious in that it seems to have it out for Squidward. I don't need the Magic Conch to tell me that this is a good episode. So, a lot of people don't like this episode, and I can kind of understand why. I mean, it's one of those the universe is against Squidward episodes, and it also has SpongeBob and Patrick acting particularly stupid, even more so than usual. But it makes sense when you think about how much of a jerk Squidward is. I mean, if he just kept on walking by SpongeBob and Patrick in the beginning, he wouldn't have gotten them all into this mess in the first place. So, I could see how this episode can be irksome, but honestly, I see a lot of really funny jokes here, and the Magic Conch, to me, is absolutely hilarious. Galloping right along to episode 42B, My Pretty Seahorse. SpongeBob befriends a seahorse. Hey, wait a minute. That title's a reference to My Little Pony, isn't it? Huh. Back before Friendship is Magic was even a thing. I never got that title as a kid. I always thought it was strange. Anyway, fun fact. Mystery makes galloping noises despite not actually having anything to gallop with. Yeah, a little bit strange when you actually think about it, but makes sense considering it's a parody of an actual horse. My favorite part is the coin slot, proving once again that SpongeBob is so popular that Nickelodeon censors will approve of anything. But, is this episode spongy or scummier than seahorse droppings? It is a good episode. Yeah, the relationship between SpongeBob and Mystery is actually really charming, and this episode has a lot of classic SpongeBob humor, from the random mustache, to the flowers attacking Squidward, to Patrick's subplot, to the random insinuation that the Krusty Krab serves seahorse meat. It's a good and memorable and funny episode all around. Episode 43A, The Bully. SpongeBob is stalked by a bully. Fun fact, this is the first time the boating school was fully shown. In all previous episodes, it made it just look like the entire school was one classroom. Starting with this one, though, it looks more like a high school, with hallways and payphones and bathrooms and that sort of thing. My favorite part? When the bully gets hit by a car and winds up in the hospital, SpongeBob actually shows up and brings him flowers, and the bully acts at first like, oh man, SpongeBob doing this nice thing for him is totally going to get him off the hook from getting his butt kicked. But nope, he's still gonna kick his butt. So, is this episode spongy or scummier than a sponge in a toilet? It is a good episode. You gotta love how persistent the bully is in this episode. He will go through great lengths to kick SpongeBob's butt. And then at the end, the realization that he literally can't do it is absolutely hilarious. There's also a ton of other good gags in this episode, and once again, Thomas F. Wilson provides a stellar performance playing a tough guy that torments SpongeBob. Episode 43B. Just one bite. Squidward becomes addicted to Krabby Patties. Fun fact, this episode has a deleted scene that was only shown in the original airing, and it still airs uncut in Canada and some other places. But yeah, apparently when Squidward first gets to the Krusty Krab at night, he notes that there's no burglar alarm. He opens the door, and as it turns out, there is a bucket of gas waiting for him and a match. He explodes into a burst of flames, then gets to the kitchen where the same thing happens to him. This scene was cut maybe because of 9/11 terrorist attacks, maybe because it was just too violent, who knows. So do I think the scene should have been removed? Well, maybe. It is a little bit on the violent side, although not as violent as some of the things we've seen on SpongeBob. And I could see how this would remind some of terrorist attacks with the whole gasoline and match thing. It also looks like an incredible fiery explosion and could totally be frightening to some children, especially Squidward's reactions. Although I personally find this absolutely hilarious, and even though it's censored on the DVD releases, you can see this clip on YouTube. So all that aside, my favorite part is Squidward not having a soul. So, is this episode spongy or scummy? It is a good episode. It has a fantastic plot, from the whole green eggs and ham vibe that the first half has to Squidward desperately trying to eat a Krabby Patty without letting Squidward know. So many brilliant gags are born out of this wonderful concept for an episode. It is a very strong plot and a great episode. Although, if I'm being nitpicky, technically SpongeBob launched a bunch of Krabby Patties into Squidward's mouth in the episode Your Shoes Untied, so technically Squidward has eaten Krabby Patties, although maybe that doesn't really count because they were forcibly shoved into his mouth by the dozen, and he had to swallow them whole. It's interesting, though, that if they had actually followed good continuity with that, we wouldn't have had this really awesome episode. So, it's one of those examples of how, because this show doesn't really follow much of a continuity, they're able to tell the stories they want to tell, regardless of if it goes against anything in the past. Episode 44A, Nasty Patty. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs believe they killed a health inspector. Fun fact, Squidward is not in this episode, despite the fact that it takes place mostly at the Krusty Krab. Anyway, my favorite part is Mr. Krabs covering for SpongeBob's wacky antics. But is this episode spongy or scummy like a dead body? It's a good episode. The concept of someone as innocent and happy and harmless as SpongeBob thinking that he killed someone is absolutely hilarious. And besides, they make it pretty clear from the start that the health inspector isn't actually dead. You've also got some funny moments with the cops, and like I said, SpongeBob acting guilty is great. It is a good and strangely dark episode. Moving right along to episode 44B, Idiot Box. Squidward is frustrated by SpongeBob and Patrick's enjoyment of a cardboard box. Fun fact, Squidward wears his sombrero in the camping episode. The box is shown in this episode. My favorite part, Box TV. Who doesn't love box puns? But, is this episode spongy or did it collect scum at the bottom of the box? It's a good episode. The plot is one of those classic Squidward can't have fun because he's so uptight, and SpongeBob and Patrick annoy him to death because they can have fun plots. It's a classic SpongeBob formula, there's a bunch of good gags. It's a good and memorable episode. Next up, episode 45A, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4! SpongeBob accidentally shrinks everyone in Bikini Bottom with Mermaid Man's belt. Fun fact, Mermaid Man's belt is purple in this episode, and no other episode in the first 3 seasons, at least, for some reason. Anyway, my favorite part is Wumbo! Alright guys, we need to talk a little bit about this episode. There is quite a bit to discuss here. First of all, you'll notice that little broken leg in the corner means that the my leg gag is totally back. Alright, so when SpongeBob is squeezing everyone into the tiny jar that he shrunk, there is a bunch of muffled screaming, and I swear, what I hear is one of those muffled voices screaming, "My leg!" I am telling you guys, it is there. That is what I hear. I am not crazy. It is muffled and in the background, but the My Leg gag has returned. So with that out of the way, we gotta talk about whether or not this is a good episode. See, here's the thing. The plot is so stupid and minimal, and it makes such little sense. SpongeBob shrinks everyone because he's afraid that they'll find out that he's shrunk other people. Mermaid Man not having any clue how to work his belt and unshrink everyone. Everyone getting pissed off at SpongeBob and destroying him. It's all really stupid and frustrating and idiotic, and in fact, this episode was actually skipped when they aired a marathon of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes to honor Ernest Borgnine after his passing. But you know what, guys? This is a good episode. And it goes beyond Wombology. Not just Wombology makes this episode great, although it's up there, being one of Patrick's greatest crowning moments, up there with Pinky Out. The whole Wombology, the study of Wumbo, line might be so insanely memorable. It might be the most memorable line in the entire series, and one of the funniest moments, but that's not all. SpongeBob accidentally torturing Squidward into all these horrific shapes with Mermaid's Man Belt is also hilarious and amazing animation and just fantastic. There's also Squidward's line about, "I wonder if a fall from this height could kill me." There's also Patrick's runner about Squidward and the pickle. There is a ton of hilarious moments and lines in this episode. The plot is absolutely stupid. It barely features Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, but it is fantastic. Moving right along to episode 45B, Doing Time. SpongeBob and Patrick try to break Mrs. Puff out of jail. Fun fact, this is the third episode where Mrs. Puff lands in jail, even though it may or may not all be just a dream. My favorite part is SpongeBob and Patrick attempting to rob a bank. Spoiler alert, they don't do a good job. So, is this episode spongy or scummier than a prison cell? It's a good episode. I don't really have much to say, but there are some good gags with SpongeBob and Patrick trying to break Mrs. Puff out of jail, and some funny gags with the juice spill at the retirement home in the beginning. Episode 46A, Snowball Effect. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward have a snowball fight. Fun fact, Patrick makes a snow cube, snow pyramid, and snow helix. My favorite part, Patrick choking. Because once again, Patrick can turn something that could be horrifying into something absolutely hilarious. So, is it spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. There's a lot of really fun snow-themed gags, and it's another one of those great plots about Squidward not being able to have fun, and then finally enjoying something but taking it way too far. Episode 46B, One Krab's Trash. Mr. Krabs tries to reclaim the valuable hat that he sold to SpongeBob. Fun fact, the grave is missing the Jaegerman part of Smitty's name. My favorite part? Here lies Squidward's hopes and dreams. What a baby. So, is this episode number 1, or does it belong in the sock drawer? It's a great episode, and one of the few that Mr. Krabs actually gets comeuppance for being a con artist. There's lollipops with underwear on them, a fight scene, his hat being number 1, a scary grocery list, a bunch of really funny and memorable gags. Next up, episode 47A, As Seen on TV. After appearing in a commercial, SpongeBob believes he is a star. Fun fact, SpongeBob slices up zucchini while making Krabby Patties, even though zucchini has never been shown in a Krabby Patty, like, ever. What a plot hole, am I right? Anyway, my favorite part is when the old man mistakes SpongeBob for a box of bran flakes. But is this episode spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. The Krusty Krab commercial is hilarious, and it's also great to see SpongeBob completely oblivious to the customers who just want him to make a dang Krabby Patty. It's really funny to see the commercial absolutely go to SpongeBob's head. Episode 47B, Can You Spare a Dime? Squidward quits his job and freeloads off SpongeBob. Fun fact, Mr. Krabs' dime is actually an ancient form of currency. It's called the Rhinestone, and you can see it in that picture there. Anyway, my favorite part is SpongeBob hinting ever so subtly to Squidward that he should get a job. But is this episode spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. Seeing SpongeBob lose his patience with Squidward and being completely right for it is absolutely hilarious. SpongeBob is a good-natured guy, and as such, Squidward completely took advantage of him. So all of SpongeBob's rage is totally warranted, and when it is hilarious here. Also, and this is very small, but I love the pun in the title, how it refers to both Squidward going broke and needing money, and Mr. Krabs, whose whole argument is over one dime. It's a really clever title. 48A, No Weenies Allowed. SpongeBob tries to prove he is tough enough to get into a tough guy bar. Fun fact, many memes have been born from this episode. If you look at the quote over there, you know what I mean. Anyway, my favorite part is SpongeBob trying to be tough and failing. Is this episode spongy or scummy? It is a good episode. Once again, we have Thomas F. Wilson playing an awesomely hilarious tough guy. I love Reg. He might be one of my favorite characters in all of SpongeBob. And seeing SpongeBob himself acting like a complete baby but trying to be completely tough is absolutely hilarious and makes this episode great. Also, you gotta love that there's a bar called Weenie Hut Jr. and Super Weenie Hut Jr. And then that ending where SpongeBob slips on an ice cube and gets a boo-boo. It is a great episode. Next up, episode 48B, Squilliam Returns. Squidward turns the Krusty Krab into a 5-star restaurant to impress his rival. Fun fact, this is the second appearance of Squilliam. Wow, that's not surprising at all. Anyway, my favorite part is Mr. Krabs' cooking. But, is this episode spongy or scummier than Mr. Krabs' cooking? It is indeed a good episode. Squilliam is a great character and is fun to see. It's also nice to see Squidward in a somewhat more sympathetic light. Yeah, the ending with SpongeBob not remembering his name is a little bit stupid, especially since Squidward mentioned it to him a few minutes earlier, but aside from that, it's a pretty fun and unique episode. Beep beep boop bop beep, episode 49A, Krab-Borg. SpongeBob and Squidward believe that Mr. Krabs is a robot. Fun fact, this plot is the exact opposite of Imitation Krabs, where Mr. Krabs was a robot there and SpongeBob didn't think he was, and in this episode, Mr. Krabs isn't a robot and SpongeBob thinks he is. It's a little bit weird how we have two episodes that are pretty much the exact opposite of each other. Anyway, my favorite part is the interrogation. But is this episode spongy or scummy? It is a good episode. Man, I really love that paranoia going on in this episode. And the things that Mr. Krabs does that makes them believe he's a robot is actually kind of believable. It's not like some random ridiculous thing happened. He starts talking to his radio because sometimes people talk to inanimate objects. He gets red eyes and has pincers because, well, he got an egg in his eye. It all totally makes sense and is just really funny to see. Episode 49B, Rockabye Bivalve. SpongeBob and Patrick become parents to a baby clam. Fun fact, this episode has become controversial due to claims that it includes homosexual themes. In addition to that fact not being fun at all, let me just tell you this. I watched this episode when I was a kid. I didn't get any sort of idea that that was where they were going with this. It just looked like SpongeBob and Patrick acting like idiots, and yes, parallels can be drawn, but there's really no controversy to this at all. It's just a bunch of people who don't know what they're talking about, putting ideas where they shouldn't belong. It's stupid, and the whole argument that SpongeBob is gay really needs to stop, because it's just idiotic. With that idiocy aside, my favorite part of the episode is 6 o'clock! 6 o'clock! 12 p.m. midnight. But is this episode spongy or scummier than a dirty diaper? It is a good episode. While I don't think it includes homosexual themes, I do think it is funny parody on gender roles and what we expect from a mother and a father. And SpongeBob and Patrick sillily adopting these roles is absolutely hilarious. Episode 50A, Wet Painters. SpongeBob and Patrick paint Mr. Krabs' house. Fun fact, Painty has a cameo in this episode. You don't know who Painty is? Well, he's the first thing you'll ever see on any SpongeBob episode. He's the pirate at the beginning of the theme song. Anyway, my favorite part is they have technology! But is this episode spongy or scummy? It is a good episode. It's such a simple premise. SpongeBob and Patrick paint a house, whilst trying not to get Mr. Krabs' very important dollar dirty. They squeeze so many awesome gags out of this one basic concept. It has to be seen to be believed. It is truly a funny episode. Also, Mr. Krabs is such a troll at the end of this episode. It is really funny, and even better still when he gets what he deserves at the very end. Episode 50B. The Krusty Krab training video. We watched the Krusty Krab training video. Fun fact, Mr. Krabs was depressed after the war. That's not very fun. Also, which war? What war did Mr. Krabs serve in the Navy in? I'm so confused. And anyway, my favorite part is, it sounds like a lot of hoopla! I'm not even gonna do the thing. This is a fantastic episode. It's one of those few episodes where they kind of break from the SpongeBob formula. it's told in the format of a training video. And as someone who's had to watch a training video over this past summer, let me tell you, it is pretty much exactly like this, right down to those cheesy jokes that they add in just to try to be funny, even though they're painfully not. It's just fantastic. It is a great parody of training videos and great comedy. And that ending, oh my god, that ending, when that originally aired, the buzz on the school bus was, yeah, no, the episode got cut off for me too. I don't know what happened, man. Nobody actually thought that that was intentional. And yet it was, and it is brilliant and horrible. There's 2 episodes right in a row that have that evil, trollish ending, only this time the joke's on the viewer. Needless to say, this episode evoked a bunch of strong emotions out of a bunch of kids, but either way, it is absolutely hilarious. Next up, and right in the middle of the season, we have our very first special episode this season, episode 51 SB, Party Pooper Pants. SpongeBob throws a house party. Fun fact, SpongeBob's mat was only seen in the one scene where he gets the key. Yeah, that whole joke about, oh, he had a key under the mat the entire time is totally thrown off by the fact that the mat wasn't there. Listen, guys, if you want to be inconsistent between episodes to tell great stories, fine. But you can't be inconsistent within the one episode, and even if it is for just a gag, it makes the gag look cheap, it makes you look lazy, and it just makes the entire thing look really inconsistent. Anyway, my favorite part was the window flip gag, where Mrs. Puff turns what she thinks is a picture of SpongeBob, and it's actually a window. SpongeBob says, I don't even know how that happened. And it's funny, because there's a lot of weird, improbable physics things to happen in SpongeBob, and for him to actually acknowledge it for once makes it pretty dang funny. Looks like Patrick wasn't the only one hanging lampshades in this episode. Over on the Patchy side of things, we have episode 51P, SpongeBob's House Party. Patchy throws a house party. Fun fact, Lux Interior sings Underwater Sun, which is also my favorite part. So, is this a SpongeBob party or a ScumBob party? I'm sorry guys, it's a ScumBob episode. There is a lot wrong here, starting with the initial premise. The idea of SpongeBob throwing a house party isn't necessarily a bad one, but it's not enough material to be a 22-minute special. There's a lot of gags in this episode, specifically pertaining to SpongeBob setting up the party, that feel like they could have been funny had they not been overused and stretched out. And I feel like the length of this episode is definitely to blame for that. Then there's the fact that the entire concept seems very gimmicky, right down to the fact that Nickelodeon aired a marathon of SpongeBob episodes beforehand and had live segments between commercials where a bunch of special celebrity guests came and held a SpongeBob party. The Patchy segments are alright, but they're nothing fantastic, definitely not enough to bring up this episode. Underwater Sun is indeed a great song, but everything else in the Patchy segments just seemed like stuff that we've retread before. Patchy and Potty fighting, Patchy getting blown up, yada yada yada, we've seen it before, there's nothing great here. As if all that wasn't enough, there is one more huge problem with this episode. SpongeBob is really unlikable here. He acts like a jerk the entire time, trying to get everyone to conform to the way he wants to throw the party. It is so far against his nature to be doing what he does in this episode. His mean-spiritedness is not warranted at all. It's not like Can You Spare a Dime, where Squidward totally pushed SpongeBob too far. All that SpongeBob does in this episode is whine about how people don't want to do his horrible party. So much so that by the point he gets arrested for completely stupid reasons, you're cheering it on because it's finally good to see him get some kind of comeuppance. He is a complete jerk here, and it makes this episode really intolerable to watch. And it's too bad too, because the episodes right before it were hilarious. If only there was a really good episode that comes right after it. Oh, wait, 52A, Chocolate with Nuts. SpongeBob and Patrick sell chocolate door to door. Fun fact, the nuts in the title actually refers to SpongeBob and Patrick. My favorite part? Chocolate! As you can tell, I'm not even trying to hide the fact that this is a phenomenal episode. All of the gags in this episode, and there are a lot of them, are absolutely gut-bustingly hilarious. This episode spawned a ton of memes online, it has a bunch of memorable quotes. It is absolutely amazing. Next up, we have Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5! When Barnacle Boy turns evil, Mermaid Man enlists the help of SpongeBob and pals to stop him. Fun fact, the heroes are apparently a subsidiary of Viacom. Viacom is the parent company of Nickelodeon, and therefore the parent company of SpongeBob. It's weird though, I figured the villains would be a subsidiary of Viacom, seeing as it is evil. Bad jokes aside, my favorite part is the heroes defeating themselves in the ludicrous ways that they do. So, is this episode super spongy or super scummy? It is another amazing episode. It's got a lot of good random gags, and it has one of the funniest action scenes ever. It's hard to explain, but it's funny, and it also has a feeling of finality. If this had been the last Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode, it would have been very fitting. Next up, episode 53A, New Student Starfish. After joining his boating school, Patrick becomes a bad influence on SpongeBob. Fun fact, SpongeBob and Gary's morning routine is very reminiscent of Wallace and Gromit. I can't be the only one who sees that, right? Anyway, my favorite part is 25. I should also note that this is the other episode that features the boating school fully fleshed out. So, is it spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. There's some good Patrick being an idiot gags, there's some good SpongeBob getting blamed for things that he didn't do gags, and there's actually a really awesome climax. It's strange that I never have too much to say about the boating school episodes. They're not particularly bad, it's just they're not really that interesting to talk about. Episode 53B, Clams. SpongeBob and Squidward must rescue Mr. Krabs' millionth dollar from a giant clam. Fun fact, this episode parodies both Jaws and Moby Dick. It really has all its bases covered. Anyway, my favorite part is Mr. Krabs really likes that dollar, if you know what I mean. So, is this episode spongy or scummier than the underside of a boat? It's a good episode. It does a pretty decent job of parodying Jaws. There's some funny meta jokes about music. Mr. Krabs goes absolutely insane, and it's nice to see SpongeBob and Squidward working together to try and survive. Oh, and I love the way Mr. Krabs treats the customer who gives him the millionth dollar. He doesn't even give him the freaking Krabby Patty. Also, in a strange pattern, this happens to be the season where we see a bunch of Mr. Krabs' prize money. We get his first dollar, his millionth dollar, and his lucky dime. 54 SB, ugh. Or technically, shouldn't it be episode 54, SpongeGaurd? Anyway, the ancient ancestors of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward discover fire. Fun fact, this is the second time, since SB129, we see ancient ancestors of SpongeBob and Patrick. My favorite part? The sound design in this episode is actually really phenomenal. Considering the storytelling is done with no English and very minimal grunts at that, the sound design itself has to be pretty phenomenal to help tell the story. Over on the Patchy side, we have episode 54P, SpongeBob BC, before comedy. Patchy and Potty debate whether the future or the past is the cooler time period. Fun fact, the caveman is played by Bill, the voice of Patrick. My favorite part is, of course, the song, When Worlds Collide. The Patchy segments here are a lot better than the house party ones. They feature a lot of weird effects, a caveman rapping with a robot. It's incredibly strange, but incredibly awesome at the same time. How about the SpongeBob segments? Well, they're not bad. It's actually interesting how they tell this story without using language. There's some different gags with the fire, and okay, so SpongeBob BC is a very appropriate name for this because it is before comedy. This episode isn't funny. They are able to tell a story, they have some things happen, but none of it is really that funny. To me, some of SpongeBob's best gags are word-based humor, and when they can't speak English and the special drags on for 22 minutes, unlike the very short episode Reef Blower, it misses something. It just doesn't quite get the humor. There's some visual humor, it's not devoid of comedy, it's just not enough. And the visual gags pretty much amount to this. There's gags about Gary's slime, there's gags about discovering fire, and then there's gags about the three of them fighting over the fire. That's pretty much it. I applaud the writers for coming up with a strange concept like this and following it through, and being able to tell the story decently well without any English. But at the same time, I have to say they missed out on the most important element. Luckily though, the Patchy segments are decently funny, but I don't think it's enough for me to call this a good episode. I have to call it a meh episode. It's a shame too, because maybe with a few more jokes thrown in here and there, the episode could have been truly great. But as it stands, it's just an interesting experiment that's not particularly memorable. It's also interesting to note that Nickelodeon doesn't really air this episode that often. They rarely air any of the special episodes, except for the Christmas episode, on Christmas. In fact, for a lot of these specials, they went years without being shown again, and the only time they get to see the light of day are in these SpongeBob marathons, which, to be honest, aren't really that rare. The that's not the only strange thing about this episode's airing. Look at that date up there in the corner. If you haven't been paying attention to it, all of the episodes so far have either been in 2001 or 2002. This episode is 2004. Yeah, Just One Bite in the Bully premiered October 5th of 2001, and the last episode for 2002 is in September 20th, being New Student Starfish and Clams. All of the episodes up till this point took place over the span of one full year. That all gets mucked up right here. This is the 54th episode produced, yet it's airing third to last. This isn't particularly strange yet, but when we get to the next special episode, I'll point out why all of this is a little bit strange. Episode 55A, The Great Snail Race. SpongeBob trains Gary for a snail race. Fun fact, this episode features the instrumental theme of Now That We're Men. You know, the song from the SpongeBob movie after they get mustaches? It's really weird to hear it here without the words. Anyway, my favorite part is Sandy's cameo. Sandy appears in this episode after SpongeBob makes a sexist comment. She appears just walking down the street saying, "I think I'm gonna kick SpongeBob's butt tomorrow." And then at the very end of the episode, she comes in and kicks SpongeBob's butt. When I was a kid, I didn't quite understand what was going on here. I thought it was just a completely random joke about Sandy kicking SpongeBob's butt. However, it's actually in reference to the fact that SpongeBob called Gary a lady to demotivate him, and Sandy's just getting payback for his sexist comment. It's actually quite funny because, yeah, SpongeBob made a sexist comment and Sandy called him out for it. Good going, Sandy. So, is this episode spongy or scummier than the underside of a snail? I hate to say it, but it's a ScumBob episode. Yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna get some flack for this, but honestly, guys, I cannot find many redeeming qualities in this episode. This episode's actually kind of uncomfortable to watch. The first half is SpongeBob mean-spiritedly pushing Gary way too far, and then the second half is Gary disgustingly crashing as if he were some weird snail race car hybrid. It's really disgusting to watch, and I've seen the Splinter. Also, it really bugs me that Snelly is only in this one episode. I know SpongeBob has bad continuity and I should be used to this, but come on, Squidward adopts a pet. It really comes off like he just bought Snelly for this one race and then shipped her right on back after she fell in love with Gary. The episode's not completely devoid of humor, of course. The Squidward tortellini running gag is kind of funny, and there's a funny gag about Patrick standing on Squidward's shoulders. You have to see it to understand it. But it really is a ScumBob episode. I can't find many more redeeming things beyond that. It's just an incredibly mean-spirited and uncomfortable episode to watch. I hope this next episode's a bit more choral than that last one. Episode 55B, Midlife Crustacean. In an effort to feel young, Mr. Krabs goes for a night out on the town with SpongeBob and Patrick. Fun fact, You're Old is sung by Martin Olson, the chief from Mermaid and Barnacle Boy 5. He also plays Hunson Abadir on Adventure Time. Anyway, my favorite part are the crazy locations that SpongeBob and Patrick take Mr. Krabs to. But is this episode cool or choral? It's a good episode. I love the locations that SpongeBob and Patrick take Mr. Krabs to, from a laundromat to a Chuck E. Cheese-esque place, and then that panty raid. I cannot believe they got away with that on SpongeBob. Also, why do SpongeBob and Patrick raid Mr. Krabs' mom's panties? That's a little bit weird if you think about it, but let's not think too much about that one. This episode has a really awesome plot and some good gags to back it up. Next up, episode 56A, Born Again Krabs. After a near-death experience, Mr. Krabs vows to be more generous. Fun fact, Mr. Krabs uses his middle name, which is Harold, by the way, to fool the Dutchman. My favorite part? The ambulance subversion. But is this episode spongy or scummy like a, nasty patty? Wait, I think I did that one. Anyway, it's a meh episode. It's not a bad episode or anything, it's just a little bit light in the jokes, and it also is a little bit too light in the consequences. Mr. Krabs gets to live, and SpongeBob gets sent back in the end. Really, nothing was accomplished from any of this. And I could forgive that if the episode was funnier, it just really wasn't. It's not a bad setup or anything, I just feel like it didn't deliver that well. But that's just my opinion. I could see people loving this episode, and I could see people hating this episode. Also, isn't it odd that Pearl isn't in this episode? I mean, her dad pretty much dies, and she doesn't even show up. It's like the writers completely forget she exists unless she's necessary for the plot. When you have a teenage daughter, she kinda needs to be aware of these sort of things. But I guess it's applying real-world logic to SpongeBob. Going back to that thing I said earlier, though, is it just me or is this the season of disgusting Krabby Patties? I mean, in Just One Bite, we get to see one surrounded by trash, and then we have to see SpongeBob incinerate one. Then in Nasty Patty, they make, well, a nasty patty, and here we get to see one that's really tainted. It doesn't mean anything, I just figured I'd bring it up anyway. Episode 56B, I Had an Accident. After getting badly injured, SpongeBob decides to never leave his house. Fun fact, this episode's ending is bananas! Alright, I'll tone down the puns. Anyway, my favorite part is SpongeBob's new friends. So, is it spongy or scummy? It's a good episode, but man is it weird. So, let's put the ending out of our heads for one moment and talk about the rest of the episode. I thought it was really funny, from the way SpongeBob hurts himself, to all of the things that SpongeBob has to avoid to not get hurt, to SpongeBob trying to live his life in peace indoors, and Sandy and Patrick trying to bring him out of his shell. Pretty good episode plot, and a lot of gags there. So now let's talk about the ending. And for those of you who don't remember what I'm talking about, all I'm gonna say is that it has to do with a guy in a gorilla suit and a guy in a horse suit. I can't decide if this is absolutely brilliant or absolutely idiotic. It's random, it makes no sense, but I guess that's part of the joke. I mean, plot-wise, there's no reason why it needed to be a guy in a gorilla suit. Really, it could have been anything to attack them and lure SpongeBob out. I guess the writers were pitching one day, what can we have attack Sandy and Patrick? I know, man in a gorilla suit. Genius, genius, good work everyone. I mean, SpongeBob even acknowledges how weird this is, and the family on the couch acknowledges it, so it's self-referential, it doesn't try to think that it is making sense here. So yeah, I don't know what to think of the ending, but I do know that that's a very short portion of a very funny episode. Moving right along, we have episode 57A, Krabby Land. Mr. Krabs builds a shoddy theme park to scam kids out of their money. Fun fact, the title card is actually shown within the episode. My favorite part? Lima beans. So, is it spongy or scummy? It's pretty meh. This setup deserved a lot funnier of an episode than it actually had. I mean, there were some good bits. I like what the kids did with the money at the end of the episode, I like the whole first day of summer thing, and I kinda like the idea of Mr. Krabs building a really crummy theme park, but I feel like they didn't really go far enough with it. In fact, Krabby Land wasn't even really the main focus of the episode. It was Krabby the Clown. There were long periods of this episode where nothing funny or interesting actually happened. It was just more of SpongeBob hurting himself or Mr. Krabs being a jerk. So I don't think this episode really deserves to be called good. Gather around the campfire, cause we're up to 57B, the camping episode. Real original name there, guys. Anyway, SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward go camping. Fun fact, Squidward is once again bad at drawing circles. It's canon! My favorite part? Could it really have been anything aside from the campfire song? But is the episode spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. It's your standard Squidward, Patrick, SpongeBob fare, but with a camping twist. You get a lot of good camping gags, you get a lot of good gags between the three personalities, and of course there's that really funny sea bear mauling that happens at the end. Just like its title, everything in this episode is simple but effective. Episode 58A, Missing Identity. SpongeBob loses his name tag. Fun fact, the waitress once again references the 11-minute episode time. My favorite part? The concept of someone taking SpongeBob's name tag, putting it on, and then robbing a bank with it is absolutely hilarious. But is this episode spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. It's got a lot of really funny gags, as well as SpongeBob's complete overreaction, and it has a decent framing device around it. There's not too much to say other than the fact that it's got a decent setup with a lot of good payoffs. Next up, episode 58B, Plankton's Army. Plankton calls upon his country cousins to help him steal the secret formula. Fun fact, Plankton's first name is Sheldon. Oh, Sheldon. Anyway, my favorite part is the secret ingredient twist. Krabby Patties is people. Well, Plankton people, but still people. So, spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. As a kid, I hated this episode because Nickelodeon promoted it as a big special event where Plankton finally gets the formula. While that's kind of true, the episode is only 11 minutes long. Nickelodeon seriously pumped this up like it was going to be some big ordeal, and really it's not. To the episode's credit though, it is really funny and imaginative. There's some good jokes about Sheldon's name, some good jokes about his cousins, and some good jokes about him finally quote-unquote getting the formula. This episode would have also provided a nice finale for the Plankton episodes of SpongeBob, if this had been the last season, of course. Also, the Algae's Always Greener and Plankton's Army serve as nice bookends to Season 3. Next up is our very last special of the season, Episode 59, SpongeBob, the sponge who could fly. SpongeBob creates a flying machine to fly with the jellyfish, but he gets stuck doing chores. Fun fact, this episode would have served as a series finale of sorts, not including the movie, of course. Anyway, my favorite part is SpongeBob's songs, of course. Over on the Patchy side, we have episode 59P, the Lost episode. Patchy hunts down the lost episode of SpongeBob. Fun fact, all of Patchy's SpongeBob stuff has a bow tie instead of a tie. I don't know, maybe he had it made for SpongeBob's house party? Seems strange to me. Anyway, my favorite part is the miner singing. Patchy may not get it, but I do. So, spongy or scummy? Well, it's... So let's start with the Patchy stuff. I really like his segments in this episode. I like the concept of there being a lost episode that he has to hunt down. There's some gags with him on a playground, some gags with him thinking he lost the lost episode. It's probably some of Patchy's finest material. So the lost episode thing is kind of clever, even though it's a complete and total lie. They didn't lose any episode, and this is further cemented by the fact that this episode didn't even end out Season 3! Ignoring the fact that in production order there's one last episode, this episode aired in the middle of 2003. They were still making episodes in 2004. As a matter of fact, Algae aired after this. As a matter of fact, The Great Snail Race Midlife Crustacean had just recently aired a few months before. And Gary Takes a Bath aired on July 26, which took place right after the lost episode. Technically speaking, Gary Takes a Bath is even a better lost episode because it was lost for an entire season for real. It doesn't feel like a lost episode if it's aired smack dab in the middle of a few other episodes. It gets even dumber when you realize that there's a big gap that happens between 2003 and 2004 where there's only a few episodes. Really, why not just air the rest of the episodes in 2003 and then late in 2004 air the lost episode and then gear everyone up for the SpongeBob movie? Alright, so that tangent aside, let's get back to how the SpongeBob side of the episode is. It's really meh. The song is alright, but it's not that memorable, and it does feature quite a few Bikini Bottomites, as well as having some decent jokes and a nice message at the end. It just isn't that interesting, and it's not that funny. As a matter of fact, if the Patchy segments weren't there, I might have just called this episode a ScumBob one. So yeah, there's not much I don't like in this episode, it just all seems kind of dull. Also, that walk cycle goes on forever. Episode 60A, SpongeBob meets the Strangler. SpongeBob hires a bodyguard to protect himself from a violent killer, who just so happens to be the violent killer. It sounds confusing, but it's not. Fun fact, this episode had two things in common with Party Pooper Pants. SpongeBob having a key under the mat, and SpongeBob having a house party. My favorite part? The Strangler's frustration. But is this episode spongy or scummy? It's a good episode. I really like this episode. From the first time I saw it, which was, by the way, on a DVD. Yeah, speaking of Nickelodeon's idiotic airing order, this episode was out on DVD before it was shown on Nickelodeon, because, hey, why just show the episode when you can make more money off the kids? I really like this episode. It has a very Bugs Bunny-esque vibe to it, where SpongeBob outwits the Strangler. That is, if you assume he actually knows it's the Strangler, which you could go either way. If you assume he knows it's the Strangler, well, then it's SpongeBob being really clever. If you assume he doesn't know it's the Strangler, then it's just sheer coincidence that SpongeBob is torturing him hilariously. How many times have I used the word torture in this video? Probably not half as many times as I use the word hilarious. Anyway, there's a lot of really funny gags in this episode, and I feel like it gets overlooked a lot because of the strange airing time. It aired nowhere near any other SpongeBob episodes, and in fact, it aired not too long before the SpongeBob movie happened. So not many people remember this episode well, but it is definitely a good episode. Alright, last episode of the season, episode 60B, Pranks a Lot. SpongeBob and Patrick use invisibility spray to prank everyone in Bikini Bottom. Fun fact, strangely enough, the Flying Dutchman is not in this episode, despite the fact that everyone makes references to ghosts. Weird, right? Anyway, my favorite part is toast. So, is this last episode spongy or scummy? It's actually meh. Yeah, I am really not crazy about this episode. SpongeBob and Patrick are jerks to most of the people in Bikini Bottom, and I feel like it's very lightweight in substance. I know I said that there have been a lot of very basic plots that work, but this one really doesn't. There are some good gags when SpongeBob and Patrick are scaring people, but other than that, I don't really find this episode particularly funny, and the plot isn't that memorable. And that is every episode in SpongeBob Season 3 reviewed. So here's an overall chart of which episodes were ScumBob, meh, and good episodes. As you can see, it had quite a bit of good episodes, but those meh episodes kind of piled up towards the end, and of course there are the ScumBobs. The ScumBob episodes being Party Pooper Pants and The Great Snail Race. The meh episodes being Ugh, Born Again Krabs, Krabby Land, The Sponge Who Could Fly, and Pranks a Lot. Looking at them all in a row like that, it is kind of strange that all three of the special episodes ended up on that list as meh or ScumBob. In my opinion, the writer should probably just stay away from special episodes. It's not Patchy that's the problem, it's just SpongeBob isn't really the kind of show where you can have this great epic plot. It's better if it keeps things simple. So here's the data from Season 3 compared to the data from Seasons 1 and 2. As you can see, Season 2 is technically speaking the best season in that it has the least bad episodes. However, Season 3, although it has a lot of bad episodes, does have some really good episodes. The episodes that are good are amazing. There are some really fantastic episodes in here, and I'm not saying which ones because you'll see them in my top 5 in a minute. And for any of you curious, here's a list of the seasons 1, 2, and 3 meh and ScumBob episodes. Some trends I've noticed in the episodes are that I really don't like it when SpongeBob is mean-hearted, and honestly, I'm not too much of a fan of Gary. I don't think he's a bad character or anything, it's just when a lot of plots center around him, a lot of them end up being not very good. Alright, now it's time for Pie Guy's Top 5. So, at number 5, we have, fittingly enough, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5. It was a close call between 4 and 5, but 5 won out overall. In 4th, we have One Crab's Trash. At number 3, we have Wet Painters. At number 2, we have Krusty Krab Chaining Video. And at number 1, we have Chocolate with Nuts. Does anyone notice anything weird about this list? If you're looking at production order, episode 50A is Wet Painters, episode 50B is the Krusty Krab Training Video, episode 52A is Chocolate with Nuts, and episode 52B is Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5. So aside from One Crab's Trash, the rest of the episodes are right smack dab in the middle of the season. In fact, they're between SpongeBob's House Party, my least favorite episode of the season. I guess they just hit their peak in the middle of the season and then kinda went downhill. Not too many things on expectations versus reality this time, but for our first expectation, I thought there would be very few meh and ScumBob episodes, but boy was I wrong. Also, and this is a small one, but there's a few episodes that I thought took place in Season 4, like Krabby Land. As it turns out, nope, obviously, Season 3. So my first note is that these episodes had a very strange airing order, but I've harped on that before. My next note is that the second half has a lot of really good episodes and a lot of really bad episodes. Some of these episodes are the best in the original run. My next note is that there were too many gimmicky episodes here. As you saw, all the special episodes ended up on my list. As well as that, Nickelodeon promoted the heck out of Plankton's army and missing identity for whatever reason. And my last note is that there happens to be a lot of crazy endings here, although I guess a lot of that is I had an accident. Well, that's about it for Season 3. Join me in Season 4 when... Wait. No, something comes before Season 4. Something really super important to SpongeBob that I absolutely have to cover. So, join me next time when I cover